Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Customer and Regulatory Committee. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat. I'll start with a mihi whakatau. I'm trying to do my best with this, but still practicing. Whakatau mai te wairua, whakawātia mai te hine naru, whakaraite mai te tinana, kia I e ngā mahi e. Settle the spirit, clear the mind, prepare the body to achieve what needs to be achieved. Yes. Right, today we've got public forum. We've got Kate McElroy is speaking today. Ms. McElroy, would you like to come forward? Thank you. Now you've got 5 minutes to speak, and afterwards would you like to take questions?
That's fine, yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, did I pronounce your name incorrectly?
No, that was perfectly fine.
Oh, lovely, thank you. You go ahead, you've got 5 minutes now.
Perfect. So good morning, councillors. My name's Kate McElroy, and I trust you have been briefly appraised about what I'll be speaking to today. I will start by outlining the neighbourhood issue that's led me to be here, and I'll then be discussing how this has been aggravated by some ambiguities in the council's stated position and the current keeping of animals bylaw. I'll explain why I think this is pertinent to the community on a broader scale, and finally I'll be suggesting some minor amendments to the keeping of animals bylaw going forwards. My husband and I live in Concord on our own house on just under 1/4 acre. We had 5 chickens that have moved with us since 2015 across Te Anau and Invercargill and now Dunedin. Chooks are all hens, all bantams, less than 1 kilo in size, and we're fully fenced. They've never had a history of escaping. They're frankly not particularly bright and two can't fly at all. The chooks roamed our property during the day and were caged at nights, but we suddenly started developing issues, there's 3 of them jumping into and then over a boundary hedge and onto a neighbour's lawn. I stayed home in the end during the week and caught the neighbour's new cat giving it a pretty good go at getting a chicken flavoured morning tea, and he was driving them over and into the hedge. This became an ongoing issue for months. We spoke to the neighbours and it was really challenging to get them on board as they didn't want the cat to wear a collar with a bell. To quote them directly, we tried that when Coco kept bringing home birds, but he hates it. After weeks of asking, they did eventually put a bell on, which has now gone again, and we asked them to discourage him from coming down to our property, and with their knowledge tried to catch him in a humane cat trap to scare him, and we bought ultrasonic deterrent alarms for our property. All of these measures were markedly unsuccessful, and despite speaking to the neighbours repeatedly and suggesting they keep him indoors during the day or that they make alterations to their fencing to keep him on their property, they refused to do any of this, and once they found out nobody would enforce any of this, they declined to engage with us at all. What this resulted in was us keeping the chooks caged 24/7 unless we were home, which is something we're ideologically opposed to on basis of welfare reasons. We rang the council and we were left with the options of predator-proof fencing our entire property, launching a civil suit, or getting rid of our hens, and ultimately we got rid of our chooks. We found this incredibly frustrating as the council's recommendations regarding responsible cat ownership as per your website include the following. If you have a companion cat, it is your responsibility to ensure they're not making unwanted visits to your neighbour's property, install or modify fencing to keep your cat on your property, etc. However, this isn't enforced due to clause 6.3 in the Keeping of Animals bylaw, which states that cats, along with bees, pigeons and doves, do not need to be kept in an enclosure or otherwise restrained within the boundaries of the land on which they're kept. In effect, cats have a right to roam. As a comparison, if I had a dog and it roamed onto the neighbour's property and actively attempted to eat their cat, there's no way that the neighbour would be expected to engage lawyers, re-fence their entire property, or to be put in the position of having to get rid of their pet for its own safety and quality of life. It would be considered to be a problem that is directly under the purview of the council and its bylaws, and accordingly, our bylaws are structured so that the owner of a dog bears responsibility for its behaviour both on and off their property. I'm not sure why we consider ownership of cats to be exempt from this responsibility. From a broader perspective, I anticipate that with the increase in egg prices and the closure of the Dunedin poultry farm late last year with the rehoming program, more people in town than ever now own chickens. As such, this is likely to be an issue for more people than just us. I want to acknowledge that I'm aware of a lot of recent media coverage in New Zealand around cats, domestic, stray and feral, their roaming and the deleterious effects on New Zealand native species. I want to emphasise that I don't wish for this complaint to become a broader discussion on cats at this stage, as it is unlikely to enable things to be resolved in a time-efficient manner. I want to advocate specifically for a small change within the bounds of the current bylaw that will ameliorate the current conflicting positions I've described and allow for more effective management of problems that are arising. Further changes that are more far-reaching is a separate discussion. As it stands currently, the Dunedin's Keeping of Animals bylaw sets out enforceable controls on the keeping of non-dog animals, including cats, for the purposes of protecting the public from ill health and nuisance. Clause 6 of this bylaw outlines the obligations of animal owners, with 6.1 making it clear it's the owner's responsibility to ensure at all times that their animal is not. The definition of this term focuses on causing offence or potential ill health to humans. Clauses 6.2 and 3 elaborate respectively that most animals need to be constrained within the boundaries of their owner's property, although this specifically doesn't apply to cats, as I noted earlier. What we would like to see is further refinement of the definition of nuisance to include causing harm to other animals or property, not just people, and the addition of section 6.4 stating that a consequence of causing nuisance whilst roaming outside of the owner's property is that a cat will lose its right to roam.
Thank you very much. That's your 5 minutes. All right, has anyone got any questions? Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Ms McElroy, I noted your faster pace as you went through with time. Is there a couple key points that you haven't made that you need to make?
Not particularly. I just had a summing sentence, if you would allow me to say that. It just was that this will strike a balance between the interests of cat owners, the majority of whom are responsible, and have animals that don't cause problems. While if we make these changes, it will allow protection for people affected by nuisance animals who are left without recourse under the current bylaws. And that's really ultimately my main point, is that there is no recourse if there are issues under the current bylaw. Thank you for the opportunity.
Councillor Gary.
Asked and answered.
Mr Mayor.
Yeah, look, have you pulled it down, condensed it down to a simple phrase that you want inserted into the Restraint of Animals Act?
Sorry, my apologies. We just essentially want to add to the definition of nuisance that, so with the current Keeping of Animals bylaw, it sets out definitions for nuisance at the beginning of the bylaw. We essentially want to add a point E to nuisance to state that if there is an animal that's causing harm to person, property or other animals off the owner's property, that constitutes a nuisance, and then an addition of point 6.4 within the bylaw proper to state that a consequence of causing a nuisance whilst roaming outside of the owner's primary property is that an animal would lose its otherwise stated right to roam, detailed in point 6.2 and 6.3.
Okay, why not just simply take cats away from the association with pigeons and bees, which are flying critters, and naturally have a much wider scope in which to roam, or requirement even. But having cats in there, that seems like an aberration.
I agree. I suspect what you're suggesting will have broader implications and become quite a contentious subject in the community. With loss of that right to roam, it essentially means all cats in Dunedin would have to be kept on their owner's property entirely. And that's, I guess, what I was alluding to with comment to recent media coverage in New Zealand in comparisons to what's happening in Australia, that while I, on a personal level, agree with that, I suspect it would require a lot broader community consultation and discussion than an amendment that would allow for an animal that was causing a problem to lose that right. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah, I was wondering why, and you've elucidated that, thank you. But yeah, do you think that it would not be worthwhile having that discussion?
I think it would be a great discussion to have. I'm just cognizant that I don't think my little change that would enable recourse under the current existing bylaw for people who are having issues with cats, I don't think that would go through. And so I'm more concerned about making a change that means that people who are having issues have a recourse to come back to, and that can happen independent and concurrently with perhaps a broader discussion on how we manage cats.
Councillor Wiley. Oh, sorry, Councillor Weatherall. Sorry, looking at you thinking Wiley.
It's very hard to be a responsible cat owner and keep a cat on your property. I have a problem with my veggie garden. It annoys me immensely. Have you ever owned a cat?
Yes, I've grown up with cats and owning them, and I've come to have very strong views on a number of things about the subject. I do think it comes back to the point that I made, that if you choose to have an animal, you take on responsibility for that animal and its behaviour, and I think that should apply to on and off your property. The majority of cats, I would argue, don't cause an issue. I have 8 neighbours, and most of them have cats, and we've got one problem animal. And so I think it's about, if you have an animal that's causing issues and you're not able to mitigate those issues by containing it to your property, then that shouldn't become your neighbour's problem.
Do you think there's anything that cat owners can do to train their cats?
I don't proclaim to be an animal behaviour expert, so I do not know. I suspect with a cat like this, based on my reading around the behaviour of young cats and a certain subpopulation of them demonstrating very strong predatory instincts, I suspect an animal like this would have to be kept contained or moved to a different home where it wasn't going to cause harm.
So I take it that your cat didn't chase your chickens?
No, George was scared of them.
Oh,
Right. And did the cat in question that you're talking about, referring to, the owner did put a bell around it for a short period of time. Did that make any difference?
It meant I knew when he was on the section, so I could chase him away. It didn't make a difference to him trying to attack the chickens. I'm not sure whether it made a difference to his success rates in terms of bringing birds home. I would anticipate that he was bringing home less birds, but from the point of view of attacking the chickens, it made no difference.
thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you for having me. Can I ask, if there's an outcome from this, does that get released into public minutes or something like that, or?
I'll just, yes, it's in the public forum, so it will be, yes.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Oh, yep, okay. We've got a slight update at the moment that the General Manager of Customer and Regulatory Services can just update you on.
So councils have all struggled because it's a very difficult, as you have already noted, it's a difficult matter how to manage the behaviour of cats. My understanding is that Local Government New Zealand have approached government and are seeking national, because bylaws are tricky to do that and tricky to enforce. But my understanding is that Local Government New Zealand a few months ago has approached government to actually change the national legislation. So that's now in the national domain.
Thank you. Right, now we'll get on to apologies. And apologies have been received from Councillors Benson Pope, Councillors Vandervis and Councillor Walker. So I move that the committee accepts these apologies from Councillor Benson Pope, Vandervis and Walker. Is there a seconder? Councillor Ackland. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? Any against? Carried. Now, confirmation of minutes. I move that the committee confirms the agenda without addition or alteration. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Wiley. Any discussion on that? No one's got any points? No. I'm going to put the motion. All in favour? Anyone against? Carried. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have an update of their register? Thank you very much. Right. Are there any questions on the action list? Well, you get away lucky today, Mr. West. No questions. Would anyone like to move the motion? The motion is that the committee notes the open actions from resolutions of customer and regulatory committee meetings. Right, you can note it, so it's noted by Councillor Wiley, and can we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Barker. Deputy Mayor Barker, thank you. Does the mover wish to speak? Thank you. No speakers. Right, I'm now going to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? Carried. Right. Customer and Regulatory Committee Forward Work Programme. So we have the General Manager, Customer and Regulatory Services, Claire Austin, will respond to any questions. Welcome, Ms Austin. Thank you for being here. Do you wish to speak to the report?
No, take it as read, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for the Forward Work Programme? Yes, Deputy Mayor Barker.
Just have one question around addressing demolition by neglect, which was raised by a council member, and we're also doing work on the Heritage Action Plan at the same time. So I wonder, regulatory staff working with planning staff? Yeah.
Absolutely, Councillor. We're just getting the report reviewed by legal, but at this point I can say that we will be referring that report back to your committee.
Yes, Councillor Lucas.
In light of Ms McRoy's,
Yes.
Ms McRoy's presentation this morning, and I note that the Keeping of Animals bylaw is not due for review until 2027, and also your comments that you noted about the National Register. Is there any way that we can progress her comments in regards to cats?
My understanding is that the issue of cats came out recently. Actually about 2 years ago. The issue that we have, it has been thoroughly examined by council and by staff, and the obvious issue of enforceability is one of the issues, although it's fair to say that the regulatory teams have worked, the compliance team have worked really closely with all the stakeholders and meet with them regularly. And we have been involved in a number of education programs and have supported, I think it's a chip and snip program going on. So we're looking at a lot more public education promotion, plus supporting the SPCA in their work. And so Ros and her team meet with the stakeholders regularly. So we are trying to do what we can, but like I say, it was thoroughly examined 2 years ago. But there is a national push now, and it's not just a register, it's looking at what other measures can be considered, but it's considered that it's in the national space now.
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Yeah, so some questions on enforceability. So the Speaker did talk about live trapping, humane trapping, so I guess, well, she said humane trapping, but I'm assuming that means live trapping. So has there been any, do we have any evidence, do we have any stories or history of live trapping of problem cats? Chipping and snipping, as you've talked about, but also enforcement requirements of problem cat owners, because one of the things that has been observed to happen in the town belt and other areas is the killing of large numbers of native birds by cats, but it's not every cat. There's only the odd problem cat. So I mean, it is a significant issue for those people who are concerned about the predation of cats. So have those things been considered or observed, or do we have any evidence of those?
Not trapping specifically, not that I haven't been advised of that being the case. Like I said before, the issue's been exhaustively considered and looking at what can be done, and at the moment what we are doing in the meantime of the national consideration of legislation is to look at the educational support initiatives that we are providing and working closely with stakeholders, forest and bird, SPCA, those. Yeah.
Councillor Gilbert.
And cats keep going. Would you consider that you have enough, for want of a better expression, and excuse the pun, enough teeth to be able to respond and react to any issues?
My boss has told me we can take this in the forward work program, which is, would be appropriate. So
I've just suggested, Councillor, that these are really valid questions, but you've got a report coming up that you can ask the actual manager about these questions and get a really good answer, rather than ask it under the forward work programme.
In which case, I will retract that pause and.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Okay.
How is the dog control review is coming up? Or are you talking about the, because there's no issue of there's no measurement of cats in terms of the control of animals.
So under the activity report that's coming up under agenda item 9, you'll be able to ask Ros all these questions.
Just though the dog control bylaw, we're required to have a bylaw, and the dog control is an act of Parliament.
So is the Control of Animals Act or bylaw an act of Parliament? Because, as you were saying, LG&Z is looking to petition Parliament to make some changes. Do we have a...
Mr. Mayor, I can get Ros to answer that question in the next item. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. I'm going to move from the... Councillor O'Malley, all right.
Doesn't relate to cats. I noticed that the trading in public spaces bylaw's up for review again. I thought it hasn't been that long since we did the last one. Can you tell me when we did the last one?
My understanding it's 5 years ago, Councillor. 5 years ago. Yeah.
Right. Okay, I'd like to move from the chair that the committee notes the Customer and Regulatory Committee Forward Work Programme. Can I have a seconder for that, Councillor Mandy Mayhem? Thank you. All right. Now, I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Motion's carried. Right, now we get to, which is the motion which we will have some discussion, the Issues and Trends report. This is a new report for this committee. Could the staff please come to the table, which they're coming? Thank you very much. We have Mr. Paul Henderson, who's Building Services Manager, Ms. Ros McGill, Manager Compliance Solutions, and Ms. Hayley Brown, our new Customer Services Manager. So welcome, Hayley. Hayley comes to us from the Selwyn District Council, so wonderful to see you here. And Mr. Alan Worthington, Resource Consents Manager. Welcome, everyone. So we'll take each department separately, starting with the Building Services. And so at present, we've got the General Manager of Customer and Regulatory will take questions. All right. Are there any questions? Mr. Mayor, you've got questions?
Yes, I do. I have a few questions. I'm really greatly enamoured of the report. Beautiful graphs, nice and visual, very easy to see. And I have some curiosity questions more than anything. But so certainly on page 29, Building Services, we've got there's a really significant December 21, a big influx of building consents, which then decreased extended the time taken to get them processed, and then it all came right. Was it? So how did it come right? Did we apply hire more people to deal with the issue, or did things just even themselves out? Because
if you recall, Mr. Mayor, last year that we actually did increase our staff numbers because of it was unprecedented demand. What we are seeing now is a drop in consents, but an increase in complex consent applications. So a lot more development, a lot more in terms of multiple properties. And Paul can talk to that if there's anything you'd like to add, Paul.
I'm just happy in general terms because and the other thing is in the RFIs on building consent applications received, they are also in a decreasing trend.
Yes, that's a result of our support and education program. I'm prepared to take that risk and put my put our hand up on that. Part of the changes we made was to increase, we improved our communication. We looked at comms. We also set up 2 roles, support and education roles, and you'll see we've done a lot of work with the industry, but also education support, and so we're doing a lot of work in that regard.
So to paraphrase that, by training and educating the people applying for resource consents to fill them out more thoroughly or fill them out better, you've decreased the time and the request for information required in order to get them processed.
As you will recall, that up until recently it was 70% of consents were requiring further information, and we're seeing that is obviously an area where we can do the education support. The building, you'll see the paper laid in terms of submission, they're actually proposing as a requirement that the liability lay with those that the submitter. So at the moment, it's the team have to make sure that people meet the requirements. So there is this potential shift. The other thing we'll see in November is that applicants will be able to see their applications in live time, in real time. So, but I would say that the team have done a huge amount of work in support and education, and we're seeing that by the numbers.
Has that been reflected by some appreciation from the industry? Because it certainly looks really good from where I'm sitting.
So we've received a lot of positive feedback, and we've got people attending the sessions that the team are also providing.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. And just acknowledging the extraordinary amount of work that is reflected in these graphs. I was interested in page 29 in the graph around the inspection days. I must have personally hit the spike, I think, way back when, and I was delighted to see that it's down to 3 or 4 days, which is extraordinary. Is that around staffing combined with fewer consents?
Yes, Councillor, thank you. Yep.
Good to know. And I was also interested in, is there any way that we affirm the applicants, the returning applicants, so you'll have builders, you'll have people who are developers who are making multiple applications over time. Is there any way that we are currently able to affirm their good operation as opposed to their good applications, as opposed to those who often put them in an incomplete manner? Do we give that feedback?
We don't have a specific list as such, but we would know internally which ones are likely to be of a better or worse quality. So we work with those individuals and try and put the educational programme into those practices first, because obviously that's going to have the biggest impact for us.
Just on the matter of feedback from the industry, what feedback have you had around things we could still work on, or the things that they're most pleased about, the improvements and all the things we're doing that have helped them?
So I guess there's 2 aspects. There's the national level and then there's the local level. At a national level, obviously the consent feedback that MB is currently running, that obviously we're talking about shortly, they do want to see that increased consistency, but particularly locally, the portal work and being able to submit applications online is helpful, but also we've still got people available to talk to and help and provide that day-to-day support where needed, so they really appreciate that side of things. So we do get a lot of positive feedback regarding individuals just taking time and helping through the projects.
And finally, how often do you meet with the industry people?
So we have an industry advisory group every 3 to 4 months, and that's made up of group home builders, key stakeholders, engineers, etc., etc. But we've also got a stakeholder framework, so we've identified probably our top 15 stakeholders that we also meet with, depending on the scale, either quarterly, half-yearly or yearly, depending on where they fit within our matrix.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor?
Looking at dog control, page 30, the animal
Oh,
services.
we're still on building services at the moment. We're just moving to the compliance in a second. Has everybody finished their questions on building? Councillor Wiley?
Thank you, Mr Henderson, for that update about the timing. In the past, we've seen similar graphs in detail. What would be the average turnaround from a time a consent gets lodged to the time it is processed out? And in the past, we've been told anywhere from 55 to 62 days. Is it still in that range, or has it dropped?
I'm sorry, Councillor, I don't actually have that information. What I can do is go away and re-look at that data that was previously provided.
I've got a question as well. I just wonder, but it's probably more one for the question around the reform, but it's to do with buildings, so you may not be able to answer it now. But there's quite a bit of suggestion that there's a shortage of qualified staff to do the. I'm assuming that's referring to like a project manager. Is that what you mean when you say that for the building? When they suggest that maybe we could have something else offered there, but is that a project manager that you're concerned there's not enough people qualified for that?
Within the submission, it talks about having, in effect, like a project manager, but having them, in effect, qualified to do that work. I guess the challenge would be is what are the qualifications, how many are there in the, and does it therefore delay a project if there isn't that specific resource available?
Yeah, good point. Thank you. All right, anyone else got any further questions on building? Right, so we'll move to compliance solutions, and Ms McGill is our person here, and I think quite a few people have probably got questions for her, but General Manager of Customer and Regulatory is quite keen to take the questions, I think, but so I'll open up to questions. Deputy Mayor Barker and Mr Mayor actually had a question before, so sorry, but you go first.
My question is the number of dog attacks. I see it's dramatically reduced in the recent months. So my question is, to what is that generally attributed?
Mr Mayor, to be honest, I can't say that there's any reason behind that we can claim.
Deputy Mayor Barker.
I just want to ask a question about the review of keeping of animals, excluding dogs and birds bylaw, because of what was brought up earlier. So I understand, because Councillor Wiley and I were on the regulatory committee, that we adopted the new rules in 2022. Is that correct? The new bylaw.
I'd have to check, but I think you are correct.
And it said that there was an early review because of roosters, and I see the next review is in 5 years' time. Is it possible to call another early review because of people bringing up issues around cats?
It is possible, yes.
Councillor Gilbert.
Thank you. So, as I was saying, do you consider that you have enough teeth to be able to deal with any problem cats? And I preface this by saying I understand that it's not all cats, that there are some the cats in my life just like to sit, lie and do nothing. So they're of absolutely no concern unless you want to open a door. But the ones that are attacking animals, do you have, or being a nuisance, do you have enough teeth to deal with them?
Just to clarify the complexities around dealing with cats, the bylaw itself is under the Local Government Act, and the Local Government Act only allows us to do a bylaw to protect people and their safety, health and safety. Cats don't come under that. The main concern around cats is to do with killing of wildlife. If a cat defecates in a person's veggie garden, for example, and we see that as a health nuisance, we can address that. But if they are killing wild birds, in the forest, or they're attacking chickens, unfortunately, under this bylaw, we're unable to enforce that. And that is why we're really looking at the national driven approach at this stage.
Right, so to clear that up in my head, no matter what desire we may have, we are kind of hamstrung until central government actually changes the restrictions that are holding us back. Would that be roughly right?
That's correct.
Mr. Mayor, did you still have a question?
No, I think it was a very full answer to the question. Thank you.
Has anyone else got any more questions? Councillor Gary?
I just wanted to ask about the health and safety of our staff, and in relation to dog attacks, it's good to see that they're decreasing, but I'm assuming we're very vigilant about ongoing protection of our staff as much as we can and training in that regard.
Yes, absolutely. We've also included further health and safety in regards to after hours work as well.
Councillor Witherell.
Thank you. In regards to bylaws, and you say that they're there to protect people with health and safety, in regards to dogs not being allowed on George Street or King Street or a few other streets around the place, what risk do they impose for people's health and safety?
That was brought up at the last bylaw review, and we are about to review the bylaw again. The councillors chose to vote for the dogs not to be permitted in George Street, and I wouldn't like to assume why they chose that, but that was their decision at the time.
So you can't identify any particular risk?
I mean, it's the same risk as if they were in any other street. There's a risk of the dog biting, there's a risk of fouling, aggressive behaviour.
Right, thank you for that. Any more questions on compliance? No? Okay, we'll move on to customer services. So, welcome again, Ms Brown. And anyone got any questions? No questions? All right, now, sorry, Mr Mayor, thank you.
Yes, page 31. There's two graphs, the hail searches and the resource consent applications. Well, that's part of, wow. Is that customer services or resource consents?
Resource consents.
So,
yeah,
but
so it's next
am I able
section.
to ask that question, or do I have to wait till you have the next section?
Well, if there's no other questions for
no,
customer services, we can move on to resource consents now. Is there no customer services question? Or?
Yes, it is. And,
Yep. Okay, so sorry, you have
welcome
to wait.
it, but you may not be able to answer this. I'm going to look towards Ms Austin rather than put you on the spot. How is the work going in relation to closing the loop?
Oh, sorry.
I didn't have a lot more to say, but just to explain what I mean, getting back to people about what happens to their inquiry or their feedback or their complaint or whatever it might be. I know work's been going on that. How's it panning out?
Thank you, Councillor. I think we're making good progress. We're looking at, and you'll note the placeholder note, the performance measures are being refreshed and may change. So we are looking at things such as the closing the loop, making sure that we are able to track all the different treads that are coming through. So the customer services refresh is its early infancy, but we're looking at our capability. We're also looking at making sure that how we can look at proactive customer care. So now that Ms Brown is on board, we've started that work, but we're hoping to probably provide an update towards the end of the year.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Looks like we'll move to resource consents. Welcome, Mr Worthington. And any questions, Mr Mayor? You had a question there?
Yes. The two graphs shown, resource consent applications and the hail searches, there does seem to be a decreasing trend across both. So do you think that, are those graphs in fact directly proportional to one another, so they're linked? Less hail searches because less resource consents?
Yes, Mr Mayor, they are linked. The hail searches, if you apply for subdivision, you have to determine the hail status of your site. So they are a guide to what's coming down the track, because people would normally get the hail search before they apply for their resource consent. So there is a definite correlation between the two. Thank you.
Any more questions? No? Okay, thank you very much to all the staff for coming up here. That's wonderful. All right, if there's no more questions, I'd like to move the motion that the committee notes the issues and trends report. Would you like to move that? Oh, I've moved it, so you could be the seconder. Thank you. All right, and anyone wish to speak on that motion? Thank you, Councillor Gary.
I just wanted to take this opportunity to acknowledge the increases in performance, and I know this is very much linked with the high volume of, for example, building consents and staffing challenges that we've had, but I do want to acknowledge the progress we've made in the time frame for the applicants and in educating applicants. There was clearly a gap there where we had applicants not providing enough information, and that makes our job challenging. And so that education continues to be really important. I also want to acknowledge how willing the team have been to take on the feedback of industry and act on that and incorporate that into the way that we operate. It's a difficult job that the team has because they're basically in a regulatory framework. There are things they have to do that isn't always well understood in the community. And I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the customer service team. You're inheriting a wonderful team who do an excellent job, and it isn't always easy. Sometimes people are ringing up in stress situations or complaining or wanting a particular outcome that we cannot deliver, but we have an excellent group of staff there, so I want to acknowledge them. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Mayor?
I would like to thank Ms Austin for this report because it's so very clear, highly legible. It's got a wonderful amount of information involved in just a few graphs that anyone can see at a glance. And I think it really tells us the state of play and all of the activity that's going on. So we've heard about that activity, but this enables us to see it very clearly and easily and speaks to the great work being done. Thank you.
Any further question or speakers? No? Okay, that's wonderful. All right. I'm now going to put the motion so that we note the issues and trends report. All those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Carried. Now we go on to the review of the dog control bylaw and dog control policy. And General Manager Customer and Regulatory Claire Austin and Manager Compliance Solutions Ros McGill will speak to the report. Please. Oh, thank you. You got back there very quickly. Thank you. Are you happy to take questions? Thank you. Great. And has anyone got questions? No questions? All right. That's fairly straight. Oh, Councillor Gary has a question.
I was interested in the change in behaviour. I've heard a lot on radio and so forth about the effect of COVID on dogs. And then post-COVID dog behaviour. Could you just explain that a little more?
Yeah, it's an international issue. People thought it was a great idea to get a puppy during COVID because they'd be at home with it. However, the dogs weren't socialised correctly. A lot of the dog owners that were breeding stopped breeding because they knew it was irresponsible to put them in the environment that they would go into. So dogs meant to be socialised a lot in the first 15, 18 weeks. They were being avoided walking down the street. You were 2 metre distance. They weren't socialising with other dogs. And then, of course, you've got dog owners at home that then now back out working. So you've got separation anxiety, you've got social anxiety, and we're seeing an increase in aggression and an increase in roaming dogs.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, terrible. Right, any more questions? No more questions? All right. So have we got a mover for this report? Thank you, Councillor Ma'am. Would you like to speak to your motion? Seconder, yes, thank you, Councillor Wiley. Right, no one speaking to that. Anyone else would like to speak to that report? No? Okay, I'm now going to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? Carried. All right. Now, we've got the submission to the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment on the review of the Building Consent System options paper. So the General Manager, Customer and Regulatory, Claire Austin, and Building Services Manager, Paul Henderson, will speak to the report. Welcome again, thank you. And so are there any questions? Yes, Deputy Mayor Barker.
We did a large submission to this review in August 2022. So from all of the things that we submitted, was anything taken up that you can see in the new version?
Not that we can see, Councillor. Sorry, Deputy Mayor. The issue in particular, which we also raised at our Q&A, we would recommend that the Council turns its mind to the issue of risk and liability, which still remains silent.
And one of the, one of the things that was also brought up was around funding. It said any proposed change needs appropriate resourcing and planning. And I wonder, was that addressed as well? I'm just reading back from some of the comments.
No, Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Lefiso.
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair. Tēnā koutou, tēnā kōrua for the mahi. I'm just curious as to when you say a broader consideration of the role of Treaty of Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi in the building system is required. What are you envisaging when you make that?
Kia ora, Councillor. The MB put a placeholding of that work, and in fact we're not particularly confident, we're not sure as to where that work's progressed, because there doesn't seem to be any, at this point, we're not aware of any full engagement with Tangata Whenua on those particular matters. So that would probably be my overreaching comment. Mr. Henderson might want to add to that. But.
And just one more question, and aroha mai. I'm just wary of maybe perceived conflicts of interest, or how it's perceived. But given that, Madam Chair, that you are a member of the Otago Investors Property Association, would it look better if the Mayor signed the submission rather than yourself? Just asking.
I'm fine with that. That's fine. Yeah. I don't have an issue with that. Mr. Mayor has a question. He was before you. I can see you've got a question yet.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. Page 76, the item 10, which is over the page from, well, it starts on page 75, but on page 76, the DCC submits that site licence would be an appropriate mechanism to achieve this requirement of control of a work site. My question is, what is the industry awareness of this concept and the sentiment towards it? Certainly sounds like a good idea to me, but what do they say?
I think that's part of what the submission's about. I mean, obviously, trying to get an ownership on a project and making sure that things are fully coordinated. But again, that's what the submission is about. Does industry think it's a good idea or not? And I guess that they'll pull the information together.
So, typically in a large project, there'll be a project manager, there'll be a management office, coordinating all the tradies. So you're suggesting down to any size site, there'll be someone in charge of the overall project. Have I got that right?
Thank you. Mr Mayor, I believe the intention, or at least the MB discussion document, was only talking about larger commercial sites. It certainly wouldn't extend down in its current form to residential sites which would require licensed building practitioners. The concept of a site license has been in the Building Act since 2012, but the provisions have never been turned on, as it were, simply because the government have said they didn't have sufficient confidence in the industry to be able to do it. So if this concept does go through, and we don't really know what they're likely to do about it, but if it does go through, it's going to take some significant training before it will have any real effect within the industry. It's a very long-term view.
So how does that reconcile with that alternate, or the other proposal in here? You know, on the one hand, more regulation with the site licence, but on the other, pushing for private enterprise, private regulation of building sites, private consenting.
Mr Mayor, we would be steadfast against the privatisation of the building regulatory system. We had a very bad experience of private building certifiers under the 1991 Act, and our view would be that MB have lost sight of that quite dismal failure of previous private certifying. The major issue is that there's no insurance available for them. Well, or at least that was the problem when the system finally fell over in the 1990s. So we would not advocate for privatisation of the building regulatory system.
And, well, it appears to me that you've made a strong submission to that effect, which is great, because, of course, the ramifications of them pushing ahead with that could be colossal.
Yes.
Leaky homes to the power of. So I have another question. The item 12, DCC submits that declaration of design compliance should only be accepted when issued by a professional that has satisfied prescribed requirements and can prove they are participating in continued professional development. Is that the case at present?
Depends on which design professional you're talking about. What we would like to see is that, and this whole issue is tied up around something we call producer statements. So producer statements were a document that were regulated under the 1991 Act and was subsequently removed in the 2004 Act. But at the moment, the entire industry relies on design professionals giving us certificates to say that their work complies with certain building code or legislative provisions. But those statements, those producer statements, have no legislative standing, exactly. So we would like to see producer statements incorporated into law so that if an appropriate design professional issues one, we would effectively be obliged to accept it, but that the liability for that would transfer to the author of that producer statement. At the moment, all of the liability trickles straight back down to the BCA.
And Queenstown in particular has a lot to say about that.
Auckland as well, Mr Mayor. They're both facing very large claims.
To me, that seems highly inappropriate. And moving on to item 13, the DCC notes anecdotally that designers are currently not taking responsibility for several NZBC clauses, including safety, access routes, airborne and impact and sound. So have there been accidents resulting? Are there tales of accident, anecdotally? You've noted anecdotally, so are there anecdotally accidents resulting from their lack of responsibility in those areas?
No, I don't believe there have been any accidents that we're aware of, Mr Mayor. The reason for that is that the BCA tends to do their work for them. So when we assess a building consent application, the BCA will go down the path of doing the work that we think should be included in those designers' work. So no issues to date that I am aware of.
Similarly, clause 26, the DCC strongly suggests self-certification should not be allowed where public safety is involved. Are there any issues about self-certification at present?
No, Mr. Mayor, because self-certification isn't available to those design professionals. They all still require a building consent, which would be granted by the BCA. So no issues.
But obviously you have severe misgivings, am I right, about moving towards self-certification?
Just as there are no issues at the moment, Mr. Mayor, we would like to keep it that way.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you. We'll move on to Councillor O'Malley, but before that, I'll just say for people who are watching the video that we've been joined by Neil McLeod, who is our Chief Advisor, and that's who is answering Mr Mayor's questions. Thank you, Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's actually just to the perceived conflict of interest. This is building consent, right? So this is the building of a building. It doesn't extend to what you do with the building once it's finished. Well, other than maintaining your inside the existing laws around how a building operates, but it doesn't extend to renters, owners, blah, blah, blah.
The consultation's open to anybody.
What I meant was, if you go in for a building consent, you're going in to do the paperwork to construct a building, and that's it, right? The other things that determine things like renting and other stuff come in later after the building's been given a certificate of occupancy. Would that be?
So generally, once you've been issued with a code compliance certificate, that's the end of the BCA process, unless there are specified systems, and then there's the warrant of fitness regime, which is outside of the BCA.
That's where I'm going, basically saying the BCA is a relatively focused activity around the construction of buildings.
Correct.
Thank you. Yes, Deputy Mayor Barker.
Is there a possibility for hearings once this is submission? Because I can't see that people are invited to go to a hearing on this. No hearings?
There was no prior hearings, and the same again, and again it's on MB submission form.
So what's the process from here on in? Because we've had last year's submission, we've got this year's submission, and perhaps we haven't quite had our voices heard. So I guess I have two questions. So is Local Government New Zealand submitting? Because obviously this is an issue throughout New Zealand. And then what is the process from here on in with this piece of work?
As far as I know, they haven't made that clear at this point. Obviously, we're also going into a general election at the moment too. I don't know if there's a team, anything else that I can add? No.
I'll just add, Deputy Mayor, we could certainly check if Local Government New Zealand are planning on making a submission.
Could I ask, there's two dates there, the 7th of August, I had noted, and then we've got the 21st of August. Can you just explain what happens on each date, please?
Originally, the closing date was the 7th of August.
Oh, right.
But because this committee meeting was being held today, we saw a week's extension, which we then was approved. But since that time, MB have extended the close of submissions to the 21st.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you. So, noting the very fulsome submission, how does it match stakeholder feedback that you've had through the various advisory groups and that you're in contact with?
I think individually, again, we talked before about the national bodies. They'll be submitting on their own personal preferences. There'll be some of the industry that does want to do the self-certification, whereas I guess we're just responding on behalf of Dunedin Council.
I was just wondering if there was much variance between local stakeholders and the view that we've expressed here in the submission.
Again, certainly the certified builders will be going through their national bodies as opposed to local submissions, as far as I'm aware.
Could I ask, I've got a couple of questions. Around the RFIs, we've obviously got quite a, is that a high, it looks high to me, the numbers, I think it's 70% or something, but is that high compared to other councils, or is ours higher?
Councillor, it's in the report that we're down to 65% with the education
65,
work.
so I said 70, so it's 5% off, right?
So we've reduced it. We've managed to reduce it by 5% in the last few months, but there is still the issue of who takes responsibility, and there would certainly be that consents would go through much more smoothly and much quicker if the information was complete upon receipt.
I have a follow-up question to that, but sorry, that didn't answer my question. How do we compare on levels of RFI? Do we know? We might not know that figure, do we, to other councils?
My understanding, it's Neil will be able to talk to this, but my understanding is that it's around about 70% around
the average, sort of, right?
Madam Chair, look, I anecdotally, I talk to a lot of other BCAs, and they're all saying that their RFI rates are about 70%.
Yes.
It appears to be a national average.
Okay, thank you. And what are you able to say? Is there any sort of theme of the same thing coming up all the time for an RFI, or what? Is there any indication what the issue is?
Yeah, the team did some analysis work, and primarily it's around specified systems. So that's the complex HVAC systems units in primarily commercial-based units. So that was the real majority. So we've focused on that as the educational side of things, primarily with architects and designers, etc., so that we can help them to get it right first time.
So do you think part of it is that a lot of people don't understand the system that we use? Does that sound?
I think it's the complexity of it. I know the general managers previously talked about the number of standards that are available within, and obviously the Building Act, the regulations, the building code, etc. There's a lot of information. So I guess our challenge is to ensure that we can educate them to get it right first time.
Thank you. Well, something also that's been mentioned in here is around competition, and I know Council has said it's not overly keen on that. Can you give an example of an area where there's competition, and has that proved that resource building consents and issues like that have been able to be approved quicker and cheaper, or has it meant they've had a lot of problems that hasn't been the case? Because that's what obviously some people might think, and just to clarify that.
So competition, I guess, when you look at it from a building consenting point of view alone, and not necessarily a product base, because some of the competition and the Commerce Commission report talked about specific products, likes of jibboard and the ability to easily access jibboard when we had the shortage. So when you look at building consenting and the speed at which you can get a building consent issued, obviously depends on the individual BCAs. There are still some BCAs that will outsource that work to private companies on behalf of that BCA. So if you go back 5 years, we in Dunedin were outsourcing some of our work. There was a clear direction for us not to do that, and for that to be retained in-house. So competition itself, you're a BCA, you're ultimately going to retain the liability around it, but there will be some councils that would say that currently, with the reduced number of building consents in industry, that you might be able to get a consent quicker if it's outsourced and they've got the resource to support it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Mr Henson just started touching base on the issues around what we had with jibboard through COVID. And that leads me, as I was reading through the consultation document, was the fact that there wasn't a lot of relevance to other global certification being accepted in New Zealand. And so, for example, if it had met a European standard or an Australian standard, New Zealand still had a lot of self-certification for products to be used in this market. Is there a lot more acknowledgement from the industry and from MB that international certification of products will be more widely accepted in New Zealand?
Councillor, there has always been the ability to substitute products. There's no news there at all. The difficulty we face is that if you look at that particular instance, the builders, the suppliers were looking to substitute products without being able to provide the technical assurance that they would meet the New Zealand Building Code. To put that in perspective, if you have a house that's designed with jibboard, your bracing schedule will reference jibboard and all of the technical information that jib provide. If you can't get jibboard and you want to change to another product, you still have to prove that the other product is going to hold the house up and provide the appropriate bracing. It's getting the other manufacturers to supply that information that is the problem. So substituting products is not an issue. We do it in virtually every building consent we grant. But you have to prove that the new product, the product you wish to substitute into the system, will still do the same job. And it's that lack of information that is the problem for us.
Thank you. So any product that is certified out of Europe could be, based on your answer, could be used by right in New Zealand, or does it have to go through a New Zealand certification as well?
No, indeed, it could be used as of right if the manufacturer can prove that it complies with the New Zealand Building Code. So the Building Code is a very performance-based document. It doesn't prescribe how you have to do things. The difficulty that is normally faced is that we get an application with a proposal to use another product, but no one ever bothers to explain to us why it complies with the building code. So we end up in a situation where the consent processes have to try and work it out themselves. That can be a difficult issue, trying to compare obscure Czechoslovakian standards, for instance, to the New Zealand Building Code, which is a performance-based document that often isn't a linear connection between the two. It gets back to that 70% RFI rate. We get the information dumped on us and we're left to make a decision ourselves. There is often a lack of rationale from the designers about why they think their design complies with the building code.
Thank you. All right. So any other questions or no? Okay. And right. So would anyone like to move this motion? Okay. Councillor Deputy Mayor Barker. And all right, would the mover like to second? Thank you for seconding that. I was coming to you. Thank you, Councillor Wiley. Would the mover like to speak to your motion? Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I asked a question about what happened last September when we submitted on the very same things and was extremely disappointed to hear that MB had not really paid much attention to what we submitted on. That was a very lengthy document with some important issues, especially around risk, and I just want to follow up on risk because all through the document is the word risk, and it is extremely concerning as a building control authority for us ending up to take responsibility for failure in the system, which means that our ratepayers will end up for taking responsibility for the failure, like what's happened in Queenstown and Auckland. I noticed that the self-certification, what was it, page 81, the risk that the self-certifier that has done incompetent or careless work may not have the desire or financial ability to remedy work or wind up their company could be deceased and made insolvent. A self-certifier responsible for incompetent or careless work may be able to avoid liability. Making adequate insurance mandatory may reduce the risk, and that is an issue because of course the risk comes back to the council, so we need to be very, very clear about that. That's why I also asked about, is there going to be a hearing, what is the process going forward, because it just seems that maybe we are yelling into the wind a little bit on this, but it's really, really important that we do it, and I think the answers to the questions are great, and I think they've certainly flagged some of those key issues. So I really hope that MB does pay some attention to our submission, because goodness only knows we do a lot of submissions.
Exactly. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to speak to the tension between homeowners and building owners' desire to have a safe building that doesn't have problems, as we saw borne out in the leaky homes crisis. But by the same token, building owners also don't want a complex process to navigate as they apply for building consents. And so that's where the tension lies. Our staff are required to carry out under a regulatory framework certain checks and balances when people apply for consents. And I believe that we have gone a long way to doing what we can within our influence, be it education, helping people navigate the process as it is, plain English. All of those initiatives that are happening in the background are very helpful. However, it was disappointing that we weren't listened to the last time we made a submission. I think this submission is very fulsome and makes excellent points. And there is a responsibility on the various players, including designers, to carry out their responsibility for elements of their design. And yes, education will go so far, but there is a safety aspect to that, and we saw that borne out in the Christchurch after the Christchurch earthquakes. The issue of liability, people always come back to council. They want someone to be able to carry that liability if things go wrong and there's no one left, and that council's often the last one standing. And as has been described, that has been borne out in the experience of Queenstown and Auckland. And that is a current issue. And we don't want to have those experiences. So I believe that the submission covers all of those issues. I thank staff for their work on this, and we'll just have to wait and see if we are heard. But it's going to be very important that we are heard, and we'll look forward to an update on that, Ms Austin.
Mr Mayor.
Yes, as the previous speakers have mentioned, this is quite significant here in terms of the building industry, but it's got much larger ramifications in general to do with the privatisation of profit versus the socialisation of loss. And, ratcheting liability back to councils when very often it is out of the BCA, or the Building Control Authority's hands as to what might have been issued or what the regulations actually are. And if there's anyone who must be taken notice of in this review process, it needs to be the BCAs, the Building Control Authorities, who have the experience at the workplace, are aware of the issues of liability and the ramifications of changes to the regulations. There's no point in having regulations unless they're going to work, and that liability is sheeted home to those responsible for the compliance with the regulations or otherwise. And that is the critical thing that needs to take place in this review of the Act. And it's very disappointing that our previous submissions haven't been taken into account at this point. And I think it's beholden on us as the politicians around this table to do everything we can to make sure that our voice is well heard in this round of submissions.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Wiley.
Yeah, firstly, I want to thank Mr Henderson and Mr McLeod for their very thorough answers, and they definitely have a very knowledgeable background in this area, and I think it's great to be able to get such clear cut and straightforward focus on where this is going. And I think it does get frustrating that MB seems to want to, in my feeling, waffle on some of these issues. And I think when we look at this, the letter that we're sending, I think paragraph 3 in the submission, that this DCC supports the aim of the review to modernise the building consent system, provide assurances to building owners and users that building work will be done right the first time and that buildings are healthy, safe and durable. I think if there's one thing that MB takes from this letter, it's that line and that focus, because nobody wants to get a repeat of what we've been through out of the 90s, that we're still actually paying for and reaping the rewards out of, I would say, for some building and property owners, unfortunately. The other thing that I want to do is I want to support the Chair of Customer Regulatory in signing this letter. I do not see any conflict in this, because this is very much about a process letter, and it's very much about the building consent system, as Councillor O'Malley raised earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wiley. Right, I'd like to speak to this as well, and I have serious concerns about the fact that the government doesn't seem to have, as Deputy Mayor Barker raised and other speakers have said as well, doesn't seem to have picked up the issues that we have voiced concern about. And sadly, around this table, this has happened far too often. We've sat here numerous times around Three Waters, around a future of local government, you name it. We've had reform after reform, and we don't seem to have got much progress with any of them, quite frankly. And it's starting to look a bit like the same thing here if we're not being listened to, and things could go through that could cause more trouble for councils than we actually have now. So, that's not on. And once again, we're going to have to be very vocal about, in my opinion, about the concerns we've got with this, because we don't want to be laden with huge liabilities and left with uncertainty around, any of that sort of thing, because could cause huge costs for BCAs, which of course in this case is us. And we certainly do need to be advocates for our city and to let them know strongly that we want to make sure we're heard. So hopefully, we have some progress around this. At the moment, doesn't seem to be. But I also hope, as a person who hears issues from people on numerous accounts around consents and issues, I'd like to see consents done. I think we do a good job, but there's always room for improvement. And so I think if a reform can improve some of these things, that is beneficial. Listening to some of the questions today, it did make me wonder if our RFIs could be improved if people understood the systems a bit better, but that might be my naivety around that topic. But certainly it would be good if that, because they do hold up a lot of the process. When I know people have said to me, it's frustrating when they get RFIs coming back all the time. So it's not just our council though, there's a lot of other councils who have it as well. But I think certainly it would be good to look at some of those things. And from the public, I know that anyone who's building a home wants it done as quickly and as cost effectively as possible. So hopefully that is a positive from this. Thank you. All right. Well, yes, Councillor Lafiso.
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair. I would just like to add to the thanks to the staff, particularly Mr McLeod and Mr Henderson's, as Councillor Wiley just said, very thorough and coherent answers to our questions. I'm not going to fight about this, but I just want to say, in terms of who signs this thing, if it's as significant as we believe, then I think the Mayor should sign it, but that's just me.
Do we need to take that to a vote or anything? Or I don't mind. What is the process with that? I don't mind. Right. Councillor O'Malley? Oh, thank you.
As chair of the committee, you can sign it as chair of the committee.
Yes.
You can always up that to the mayor if you wish, but it is, you can, the committee's got delegation to make the submission, so that's appropriate that you as chair of the committee can sign it.
Okay. If people have a concern about a perceived conflict of interest, I'm happy for the Mayor to sign it. As Councillor O'Malley raised, I don't think there is a conflict there, but myself and Councillor Wiley are happy to have our names on it.
And I'm perfectly happy for you to sign it in terms of things. However, I do have a few comments to make to the committee if we're asked to speak to it. So it might be useful for me to speak to it. I don't know, unless you've got some really important points to make, but I think I have a few comments that are relevant, actually.
So there's no hearing, though, that's my understanding.
Well, there may not be.
Yeah,
No.
I mean, maybe, but that's a very good point that you've raised there, and I 100% support that. Maybe it's, if we are very concerned about these issues, and certainly I think I will go further and request more information from the General Manager of Customer and Regulatory around that, but is that maybe we even ask to meet a minister or something and raise some of these concerns about the fact that many of the things we talked about haven't been addressed, because that is a concern. Councillor O'Malley.
Sorry, just to clarify there, Councillor, for you.
Yes.
That should there be hearings, the Mayor is able to speak at those hearings.
Yes, I would have thought so. Yeah. Right, Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's just around basically your signature or not of the letter. The original statement was that because you had a conflict of interest, that would be an issue, and I think we addressed that. My feeling with the chairs versus the mayors, I think if the committee has a role to play and it sits solidly with that committee, there's nothing wrong with the chair being the person. We've done a few out of infrastructure where it's co-signed. And I think that's a mechanism where you may bring in the authority of the mayor along with the knowledge of the chair.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. I appreciate all that. All right.
So just to clarify, Chair, so we're going to go for a co-signed? A co-signed?
So, yep, I'm fine with that, yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Right, so we've got a mover. So we're now, would the mover like to speak, share their reply, have their opportunity to exercise their right of reply?
Just quickly, when we're talking about advocating, it would be good to talk to LGNZ about some of these issues, because they are across all of the system, and I think the local government New Zealand is our voice there. I just also wanted to raise about education, because that's been mentioned quite a bit, and we've got in here on page 77 the DCC supports an educational approach in the first instance. Therefore, thereafter, DCC encourages MB to take a strong approach with disciplinary issues, and that a licensed building practitioner must be held accountable for their actions or inactions with appropriate penalties. And I think that covers some of it, because there is so much you can go with education, but there also has to be penalties, dare I say it, to diminish the risk, I guess, basically to BCAs like us. And I think that's one of the key issues, is that risk to us. And therefore, when we're talking about how the process is going to go, that's why I would like us to do that very strongly. If there's an opportunity for hearings, which it seems there isn't, or whatever the next step in MB's large process might be. I think that was all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've raised some very valid points. Right. So now we've done that, we will put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? Carried. Any items for consideration from the chair? No? Lovely. That being the case, I'll call this meeting closed at, what's the time now? Where is the time? Yes, that time. Thank you. Oh yes, there we go. 11:26 a.m. I'll do a karakia to finish, and unu here, te po, ki wātia, ai kua wātia. Remove, uplift the posts in order to be free. Yes, it has been cleared. And I declare the meeting closed. Thank you everyone for your questions, your words, and thank you. And also thank you, he's gone now, but for us to have the Chief Advisor of Building Consents, Neil McLeod, come in was extremely good. So thank you very much. We've got lots of knowledge here in the room.